Taking Flight by Nyan Zangetsu, Chapter 1. Take flight. Strength is all there is, boy. Strength is everything. Nope. Who says the weak can't become strong? Who says kindness ain't a strength? Take flight. At long last, the ceiling had been completed. Minato gazed down at his son, his child, fighting to keep the smile on his face as blood seeped out of the corners of his mouth. His wife Kushina was in front of him, as they both had been pierced in the stomach, protecting their son from one of the QB's claws. His wife had been shedding tears for their pregnancy, his name stitched ever so lovingly into the blanket covering him. They could not, however, stifle his cries. Try as he might, Minato couldn't help but feel guilty at what he had done to his baby boy. He knew some people may dislike him, but he believed they would see him as the little hero he was. He had to. He must. To think otherwise was to die with regret, and that was something he dared not do. In a way, this killed two birds with one stone by turning his son into a Jinchuriki. He protected his village with one hand, and with the other gave his son a power to fight against the masked man that had wronged this horrible fate. Then something strange occurred. His son was surrounded by a strange light and disappeared. Just like that, there was no warning, no explanation for this sudden phenomenon. His son and the blanket swaddling him on the altar were suddenly gone in a burst of golden energy, leaving naught but empty air behind. Shock filled both parents' faces as they cried out for him, yet their bodies fell lifeless and listless before they could act, for their souls had gone to the Shinigami. The last breath was their son's name. Naruto! The QB yelled at its new confines and slammed against its cage in anger. It too realized that something was wrong, and with every fiber of its being it fought to escape the strange fate befalling it. Jaw snapped at the bars of its cage, claws clanking harshly upon its prison. It suddenly felt its power being drained, just as its yin half had been. No! It roared as its chakra was ripped from it, its body becoming little more than a shriveled version of itself. Upon the bitter lock of its cage, a piece of paper with kanji for seal on it vanished, only to be replaced by a spiral lock replaced that closed around it, winding tightly shut. The large mass of chakra fell through the tiny boy's body and lit it a shining gold white. Silas Brawnwen was not a good man, nor could he be called an evil man at that. He simply was. Light and dark held no meaning for him. As leader of the Brawnwen tribe, he was expected to show strength in nearly all things: strength of mind, strength of body, and of course strength at arms. He fought his way to the top and killed the last chieftain many moons ago, and he had no doubt that someday he too would face the same fate. One day in the far-flung future, he would die choking on his own blood as the next chieftain stepped over his corpse and claimed his title. It was the fate of everyone who dared to rule the tribe. Eventually, someone stronger would come along, and when they did, well, Silas didn't begrudge his future killer. On the contrary, he had long since resolved to welcome them with open arms. This was the way of the world. The strong thrived, the weak perished. Some called it cruel. Perhaps it was, and perhaps it wasn't. He didn't know. This was the way his father had taught him, and his father before him, and their father before them. In the tribe, strength meant everything. Only the strongest led, and only the strongest prevailed. Strength got you first pick of the loot after a good raid. Strength brought you wine and partners aplenty. Strength gave you the richest of foods in spring and warmest blankets come winter. Strength built your legend brick by bloody brick until your reputation was so fearsome that everyone whispered your name. It was strength and his own cunning that allowed him to survive as long as he had. There were always challenges, of course, and there always would be. Ever those seeking to usurp his position. Some of them might even be his own spawn someday. Not a bad way to go, that. But that was the future. The president called to Silas now, as surely as the strange sight before him. A weathered hand ran through dark hair gone nearly silver as he squinted through the smoke. Blood-red eyes flashed in the waning moonlight, narrow and intent as they squinted down at the small bundle before him. Where did you come from? A quiet gurgle greeted him, sad and mewling. Silas sighed, talking to an infant. If only his men could see him now. No one had expected a babe to fall out of the sky in the dead of the night and crash into their camp, least of all the explosion that followed his arrival. 3 of his men had died in the blast, 3 grown warriors, their bones now burned so badly that he barely recognized their bodies and ashes. It beggared belief. A child falls from the sky and lays waste to all before him. That was how some of the old stories started. Long yarns that narrating hens like to tell their children around a roaring fire in the blackest night. Fairy tales. And yet, here he was, only a few days old and already a killer. Even if he didn't know it yet, this newly newborn lay on the ground before Silas, wrapped in swaddling clothes. All around him, the earth was pitted and scorched, yet there wasn't so much as a hair out of place on his head. No, it wasn't natural. Some might call it witchcraft or magic, or even a dust explosion. Stooping down, the chieftain frowned at the child. The child frowned back, squinting at him with tiny blue eyes. He didn't cry, didn't make a sound. "You're not dead, are you?" Silas muttered, prodding his cheek. "Come on now." Mistakes were made. With that simple prod, the infant's thin veneer of calm shattered like so much glass. He started wailing. Silas jerked back with a hiss. "Stop that!" Incredibly, the boy complied. Well, he didn't think that would work. This was foolish, he told himself. He shouldn't even be considering it in the first place. His woman had given birth only a moon ago. Twins. He hadn't gotten around to naming them yet, and they didn't need another mouth to feed. By all rights, he should ignore this child, bury that, and give him away, whatever he was, wherever he had come from, whoever his parents had been. He had nothing of value to offer the tribe. If they took him in, he promised only to be a drain on the resource until he came of age. Assuming he lived that long at all, he was weak. Miracles aside, there was nothing to be gained by keeping him. And yet, something in his cold, black heart stirred. It wouldn't let him to leave the boy alone. Perhaps that was a good thing. Silas was strong now, but he'd been weak once upon a time. Every scrap of strength he now held came at great cost at him. In his youth, he'd been a frail child like this one, weak, useless. Back then, he could barely lift a sword. Silas the Small, his tormentors had called him. Silas the Frail, Silas the Craven. Then he hit his growth spurt and left them spitting teeth. With it came a new host of titles. With it came a new host of titles. No longer was he Silas the Small. Now he was Silas the Savage, Silas the Clever, Silas the Red. He'd come from nothing and become something, someone. These days, every huntsman in Mistral knew his name. Only the foolish or the grim dared face him in battle anymore. And these days, those were few and far between. No one remembered the weakling he'd once been. Of course they didn't. He'd killed everyone who dared speak ill of him. He became strong through no merit but his own. Who was to say this boy couldn't do the same? Who was he to deny him a chance to prove himself someday? If this lad had a semblance like that, oh, how little he knew. Then surely he'd go far. Idly, he noticed something stitching into the cloth wrapping him. Symbols, words. "Naruto, huh?" he rumbled, reading them. "Strange name. Saves me the trouble of giving you one, I suppose." Silas didn't question it. He simply acted. Rough arms curled around the babe, plucked it off the ground, and cradled it against his chest. He inspected the tiny creature with a keen eye, small and pink. Not much to look at. He suspected that could change in time. Silas Brawnwen wasn't a good man. That much was true, but he wasn't a monster either. There were lines he wouldn't cross, depths he'd never delve. This was one of them. He told himself he wasn't doing this for him. Perhaps his children would be challenged by this whelp someday. Perhaps it would give them reason to excel. Without warning, the babe bit him. Well, he tried. It didn't hurt, but Silas recoiled in surprise nonetheless, startled by it. "Would you look at that?" he laughed. "Seems you've got some spirit after all. Suppose we'll keep you." He had no way of knowing that this boy was from another world. Would it have much mattered if he did? Who could say? And the future took flight. Previews. "Well done. You will be strong. I'll see to that." Silas smiled, and this time there was pride in his smile. It reminded Naruto of a shark. "Now, dodge." Gah! "Come on, Raven. Leave him be." "No, if you won't fight, what good is he to us? He's weak." Raven laughed at him. She thought the boy weak, powerless. Only the truly defenseless refused to fight. Coward, she spat. You don't even have a family, not really. Take that back! It was the wrong thing to say, and she failed to realize her mistake until those kind blue eyes blazed red. That was her only warning before the boy surged out upward and slammed his forehead into her chin. In hindsight, it was a good headbutt, one that smashed through her aura, turned her world white with stars, and nearly knocked her out on the spot. For all her bluster and bravado, Brawnwen was only 7 years old, out on the was only 7 years old little girl. That headbutt knocked her right to the ground. She bounced once, eyes wide before she skidded to a halt. Angry tears welled up in her wide red eyes. The boy, Naruto, she recalled, glowered down at her. Weak, huh? This weakling just knocked you on your ass. Crow fell to the ground a moment later, but for a different reason. He was all but howling with laughter. Ha! He got you there, Raven sniffled, angry tears welling up in her eyes. I'm telling. The tribe needs to be better than this. We shouldn't hurt people. It's not right, you know. The three of you will go to Beacon, learn the hunter's tricks, and return to us. End of Chapter 1. Taking Flight by Nyan Zangetsu. Chapter 2, A Different Kind of Strength. Fight me? Nope, not interested. What's wrong? Scared? Afraid you'll lose? Nah, you're just too small. I'm afraid I might squish you. Why, you take that back. Take it back right now, you blonde bastard. Fine, short stack. What, want a handicap? Do I need to bend down so you can swipe at me? Little Raven and a little Naruto. A different kind of strength. Time passed. Years flowed like wind as the boy spent his life among the tribe. He learned their ways, their traditions, their customs, how to walk, how to talk, how to wield a weapon. Slowly but surely he grew in power until he began growing like a weed, both in height and strength, all the while Silas watching him intently. Of course he did. He would allow for nothing less. He hadn't taken the boy in out of the goodness of his heart. The run would be strong, or he would be cast out. That was the way of the tribe. Thus, he trained him as he trained his own offspring. Ruthlessly, he pitted them against one another, time and again, until they learned the ways of war. He pitted them against one another, time and again, until they learned the ways of war. They were meant to be rivals, enemies, constantly seeking an edge over the other. Instead, they became friends. Naruto never turned violent, never lashed out, never took pleasure in hurting others, never expressed any interest in learning how to reave or raid as Raven did, nor did he feel the need to constantly ask questions as Crow often would. Rather, he focused wholeheartedly on his skills. He trained and trained and trained until he dropped. Then he trained evermore. He did not display any weaknesses beyond in this, and as such, Silius felt no need to stamp down on it, nor did he think to curtail this strange focus. In their 10th year came the time for their testing, all three of them, and what a test it was. Dodge, brats! A heavy black staff whirled down at Naruto's head like a thunderbolt. Sharp blue eyes widened, not at the command, but the speed behind the weapon. Only 10 years old, and already he knew better than to take an attack like that head on. It wouldn't just break through aura, but the bones behind it as well. He whirled away in a blur of blue on black to evade the initial strike, and when said staff split apart to bark an angry dust round in his face, he was prepared rather than make the mistake of tanking a shot like that. He dropped flat to the earth to duck and let the fire bullet arc howl harmlessly overhead past. Unfortunately, that meant it slammed right into Crow's chest and sent him sprawling instead. Naruto winced as his partner cried out in pain. Bad luck, Crow. What kind of semblance gave you such bad luck? Foresight was a vicious weapon, just like her master, and Silas was merciless in his assault. Even as Naruto spun upright and the chieftain was storming forward, a quarterstaff whirling in his hand, its sparked edge slammed at his head, only to meet steel instead. Of course it did. After all, Naruto had a weapon of his own. Everyone in the tribe did. Silas chuckled as he bore down with all his strength. Good, you managed to block this time. But now what will you do? Naruto grit his teeth and refused to speak. As far as blades went, prophecy was a decidedly lightweight weapon, a mass of ebony steel forged with honed edges and jagged tips. It wasn't meant for sustained clashes. This was a tricky weapon, designed for ambush and surprise attacks. Even now, he could feel it warping under the strain. Yanking his weapon back, he spun and cut out the chief's legs. Silas swatted the strike aside with contemptuous ease and beckoned him forward with a knowing smirk. Naruto chased him with a snarl. They raged back and forth across the camp like hellcats, raging and striking with singular ferocity, until finally, he saw his moment. A flick of his wrist and a press of a button near the hilt caused the barbed blade to split apart into serrated segments as it unfolded to become a corded whip with a biting edge. It lashed at the ground like an angry beast, forcing Silas forward to avoid its longer reach and deadly coils. Just as planned, another flick sent it swirling around his staff. Silas jolted in surprise. Naruto seized the moment and yanked with all his might, somehow managing to force the quarterstaff down to the ground. The moment it touched the dirt, he surged forward and stamped on it with all his might. As Silas grumbled in acknowledgement and stuck out with a free hand, trying to gouge out his eye in recompense for his temerity, Naruto turned his head and let it glide off a whiskered cheek like a crackle of aura, then peeled a palm from Prophecy's hilt and ripped a knife from his belt. It burned through aura and found flesh. For the first time since their brawl had begun, Silas grunted in surprise and glared at the red stain spreading across his trousers. Red eyes narrowed in what might have been anger or pride. He wasn't sure. "Impressive," he chuckled. "Most impressive, but you've forgotten something." A sinking feeling opened in the pit of Naruto's stomach, and that is, "I don't need my weapon to fight you. You do." Blue eyes widened. Silas let go of his staff, and the wayward Jinchuriki had all of an instant to comprehend his peril before a knee cracked in his jaw. His thoughts shattered like brittle glass, and he dropped his weapon as he went spinning into the dirt. Silas didn't give him the chance to recover. A crushing kick drove the wind from his lungs and left him retching on the ground. You rely too much on that sword, boy." The admonishment stung his ringing ears. "Trust in your fist a little more." The elder Brawnwen tossed his prophecy and then stomped to reclaim his own tangled weapon. Raven dove at him out of the corner of his eye, forcing him to turn and catch her blade instead. Let he lose a hand. A faint weight against Naruto's hunched back told him Crow had also seen the opportunity for what it was and chose to pounce, and bastard, using him as a springboard. Alas, the twins acted too rashly. Naruto heard a foresight click ominously and hastily reverted prophecy to its sword form. When he looked up, he saw the weighted staff complete its transformation and change into a towering axe. Credit where it was due, Crow fell back the moment he saw it. Naruto didn't much blame him. Bad time abounded whenever Silas utilized the makeshift function of his weapon. By now, the boys knew better than to strike recklessly, lest they'd be caught by the explosion that followed. Raven didn't. She flew at Silas like a shrieking banshee, sword in hand. Naruto slammed a palm to his face. "Raven, don't rush in, damn it!" Silas saw her coming and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile, even from this distance. Naruto saw the wind-up coming. He knew what was next. He'd seen it time and time again. The elder Brawnwen didn't deign to dodge. There was no need. The moment Raven drew within striking distance, his axe blurred at her head with impossible speed. To her credit, the little girl yelped and frantically tried to brave her blade with the back of her hand in an attempt to block, but it availed her not. Raven's father smashed through her guard and sent her sailing backwards through the air, much like her namesake. Mercifully, her flight proved a short-lived one. She struck the ground and bounced once, twice, thrice, skipping and sliding across the camp like a flung stone. The moment her momentum abated, she scampered upright, bright eyes burning with blood-stud gleam on someone so small it proved a terrifying expression. No child should look so pleased by a promise of violence. Crow sighed. "She never learns, does she?" Naruto coughed and wiped his mouth. "You know how she is. He'll knock the stupid out of her sooner or later." Maybe. He earned a shrug for that, followed by a concerned look. You need to fight harder, though. He wrinkled his nose as he climbed to his feet. Don't want to hurt Uncle Silas too much. You just stabbed him. Eh, the blonde waved him away. I know he can take that much. The old man doesn't seem to share the sentiment. Crow craned his neck as Raven hurtled back into the fray. You're gonna get hurt if you keep going like this. We shouldn't have to. He shook his head. The tribe needs to be better than this. It's not right, you know. The younger Brawnwen looked away and scratched his cheek. Don't say that too loudly. Why not? Naruto blinked. Why, you won't tell. Sheesh, don't say it like that. See, this was why he liked Crow. Crow made sense. Crow was his friend. Crow was willing to listen. Crow wouldn't rat him out for expressing his own private reservations. Yeah, he was rough around the edges. Everyone in the tribe was. But at the end of the day, Naruto considered him a good person. Raven was not. She was all fire and fury, fierce and wild, like spring itself. She'd been the first to walk, the first to fight, first to ask about joining Silas in the raid. First. That was all she cared about. Whenever she accomplished something they couldn't, she lorded over the two of them. Restraint. She didn't know the meaning of the word. She had to win every argument, every brawl, every fight, everything. Even now, she raged against Silas like she was actually trying to kill him. Sometimes she worried him. They'd grown up together, the three of them, and that attitude had only worsened with age. She claimed they were the same, that the three of them were meant for this. Even their weapons forged by a kidnapped smith shared the same meaning. Omen, harbinger, prophecy. Honestly, he was beginning to sense a pattern here. Meh, probably wasn't important. Better go help her, Crow drawled when Raven cried out. She's getting creamed out there, Naruto pouted. Or we could ignore her. Yeah, let's do that. His friend frowned. That's my sister out there. He got a black look. Your sister's a bitch. Crow laughed. Sometimes, yeah. No 10-year-old should cuss such. But they weren't children. Not really. No, not anymore. Children didn't last long in the tribe. They never had a childhood. Some small, tiny part of him felt bad about that. This wasn't normal. They shouldn't live like this. But he knew better than to voice his concerns to anyone else. Crow understood, but Raven would snitch on him the moment he opened his mouth. Daddy's girl, that one. And maybe that was all right. She needed some normality in her life. Speaking of which, they should probably help her. Picking himself up, Naruto snatched his weapon out of the dirt and stumbled after his best friend. Silas saw them coming, took one look at them, and shook his head. That's enough for today. You lot are in no shape to fight. Yeah! Raven lunged at him when he wasn't looking and casually swept her legs, sending her tumbling their way. Naruto caught her and she slapped his hand aside with a snarl. But I can still fight. No buts, Silas snarled. I have no interest in battling about weaklings. You fought well today. The keen red eyes roved across each of them in turn. Raven, those scarlet orbs found his daughter first. Your ferocity was admirable. You kept coming even after you were broke. That takes strength. Raven preened under his words, a wide smile lighting her face. Naruto shook his head at the sight of it. Suicidal was what she'd been. Why praise that? Why tell someone to keep driving at their enemy until they died? He hated the idea of it. As if sensing his doubts, Silas rounded on him in the very next moment. However, it was Naruto who drew first blood. He cast his gaze to prophecy, still hanging limp in the boy's hand. He also thought to entangle my weapon and deprive me of it. He nearly succeeded. Take heed. Strategy is better than tenacity. You do well to remember that, Raven. Raven sulked. Crow. Quite suddenly, Crow found himself the recipient of Silas' attention. Naruto saw the hope burn in his eyes. Do better. He saw it extinguish in the next instant. Silas Brawnwen had not a single word of praise for his son, and it showed on Crow's face. Naruto clasped his shoulder and flashed when he hoped was an encouragement look his way in the hopes of raising his spirits. It didn't do a word of praise for his son. Rest and recover, Silas instructed them. It was more a command than admonishment. The three of you will join us in tomorrow's raid. Naruto sunk in a sharp sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth. Raven hissed in absolute triumph. Crow's face went white. Seriously? Are you questioning me? Silas rumbled. No, he grumbled. With that, their chief left them to it. Naruto took a moment to steady himself, catching his breath as he crouched in the dirt. His thoughts whirled out of control, refusing to obey him. A raid? He'd never been on one before. Silas had never expressed any such interest in taking them along, and he'd always managed to wriggle out of them before this. Why the sudden change? He didn't know, didn't understand. It made him feel sick. He knew what a raid was, what it implied for them. Applied for them all. Raids meant violence, death. They'd attacked an innocent village, and then a shadow fell over his face. Trying to upstage me, huh? Not now, Raven. A blue eye flashed over his shoulder in a rare moment of anger. I'm not in the mood. He knew what Raven was doing. She felt glutton on what she assumed to be a victory and the promise of a raid, a chance to prove herself. Yet at the same time, she found herself riled by the praise Silas had so freely given him. She'd been trying to hit him for years. She'd never succeeded. It must have burned to know there was one thing that she couldn't upstage him in. Was her pride that weak? Beneath all that bluster and bravado, he knew the truth. She was a scared little girl. Sure enough, she grabbed his shoulder. Then fight me. Nope. Why? There was no point in it. I don't want to fight. What's wrong? She jeered him. Scared? Afraid you'll lose? Nah, you're just too small. He waved her down. I'm afraid I might squish you. Raven's face turned a lovely shade of red. Her height had ever been a sore spot for her, a constant point of shame. Naruto stood at least a head taller than her, and Crow wasn't far behind. Oh, she'd hit her growth spurt someday, but the day was not today, and the three of them knew it. Why you? She sputtered incoherently. Take that back. Take it back right now, you blonde bastard. In hindsight, Naruto knew he really should. There was nothing valuable to be gained from riling Raven like this, only misery. Raven, Crow warned, leave him be. No, if he won't fight properly, what good is he to us? He's weak. Raven laughed at him, and Naruto watched her hide her weakness behind a shield of false bravado. She was going to keep pushing this time. She wouldn't stop, all because she thought him weak, powerless. In her eyes, only the truly defenseless refused to fight. What did it matter if he was taller than her? Coward, she continued, spitting at his feet. You don't even have family, not really. Father's just taking pity on you. Something twitched in the back of Naruto's mind. He saw red. Take that back! It was the wrong thing to say, and she failed to realize her mistake until those kind blue eyes blazed red. That was her only warning before he surged upward and slammed his forehead into her chin. In hindsight, it was a good headbutt, one that smashed through her aura, turned her world white with stars, and really knocked her out of the spot. For all her bluster and bravado, Brawnwen was only 10 years old. She wasn't yet the monster she'd become in the future. That headbutt knocked her in right to the ground. She bounced once, eyes wide before she'd skidded to a halt. Angry tears welled up in her wide eyes. Naruto glowered down at her and shoved a fist beneath her chin, forcing her to be silent. Weak, huh? This weakling just knocked you on your ass? Crow fell to the ground a moment later, but for a different reason. He was all but howling with laughter. Ha! He got you there! Meanie! Raven sniffled, her angry tears welling up in her eyes. I'm telling. Naruto blew out an angry breath. Was it wrong to pity her? Maybe, just a little. With a long-suffering sigh, he climbed to his feet. Come on, short stack, don't cry. Want a handicap? He stepped back and beckoned her forward, such as Silas had. Do I need to bend down so you can swing at me? Really? She eyed him wearily. You'll fight me? Seriously? You're not kidding? No takebacks? She was just so damn adorable when she squirmed like that. We gonna fight or what? Sure enough, Raven took the bait hook, line, and sinker. She flew at him with a triumphant grin. Suffer me now! Previews. Bone reading. Raven watched the old crone hunch over the fire. Why, what does the future matter? The wise old woman laughed at her. More than you know, dear girl. More than you know. Care to know your future children? Behind her, Naruto and Crow exchanged a nervous glance. The three of you will go to Beacon, learn the hunter's tricks, and return to us. Friends are just people you haven't met yet. The blonde girl blinked back at him, green eyes narrowing. That's nonsense. Nah, Naruto beamed. Nonsense would be fighting for no reason. What's your name? The soon-to-be student considered his outstretched hand for a long moment. Reluctantly, she accepted it. Glinda. My name is Glinda. Osmond sighed. I'll have to ask you three to keep yourself under your control while you're here. End of chapter 2.